Today I'm going to talk to you about the single most powerful and effective tool that we have to live successfully with our dogs and resolve unwanted behavior. Stay tuned. It's really going to be good. Hi, I'm Kathy Kawalec, and I believe that our dogs connect us to the heart and soul of what really matters in life. So hang out, and we'll take a deep dive into the human-dog connection and explore strategies that will inspire you to create legendary, enlightened partnership with your dog. This is the Enlightened by Dogs podcast. Well, hello, my friends. Kathy Kawalec here, your host of Enlightened by Dogs. And yes, I have most definitely been enlightened by so many dogs over the years. And I hope that you are starting to get the idea that our dogs are amazing teachers, and the fact that they live with us, that that we live with them, that we cohabitate is, gosh, it's just a gift. It is such a gift. And yeah, I know that sometimes it seems really challenging, when our dogs are behaving in ways that just like driving us crazy, or we don't understand and we can't seem to resolve effectively. You know what I mean? I get it. But overall, it is so worth it, because when we dive into how to be a better partner, how to be the person, how to be the human that our dog needs us to be, when we start traveling down that road, things start to change and we start to feel better, enjoy life more. We're more resilient, and we can handle the things that life throws at us and not be so sucked into the drama of things, that happen in our life that are just not good. You know what I mean? And we can just handle them differently, in a way that always leaves a crack open, like the light, the guiding light is always visible to us, that we can always find our way back to center, back to balance. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so today I wanted to talk to you about what I'm calling the single most powerful and effective tool that we have to live successfully with our dogs and, well, with anyone that we have a relationship with. And that is communication. It all boils down to communication. And unless you and your dog learn to fluently communicate anytime you are interacting, all the miscommunication that happens as a result of that is going to lead to struggles ahead of that. You know what I mean? And so I think that communication is that single most powerful and effective tool. I mean, maybe it's the only tool. Maybe that's a better way to actually think about it. And when we do think about it, like, what else is there really, right? You, your dog, your relationship. I mean, that's it at its most fundamental level, right? And when we speak about a relationship, we speak about a collaborative, trusting partnership style of relationship, because obviously there are many types of relationships, and we are looking for a collaborative, trusting, partnership based relationship. And so, everything else besides communication, I mean, everything else sort of becomes perimeter, extra, probably not needed stuff, like the different types of tools, the collar, the harness, the type of leash, the type of treats, the type of toys, the type of games, the different aids, talking about distractions, talking about skills, all that becomes extraneous bits of information that have the potential to confuse us and confuse the issue at hand, which is effective communication with our dogs. And so what exactly is communication? Well, the way I like to think about it and speak about it is the successful exchange of information, ideas, and feelings. And so you can see by this definition that communication is an exchange. It's not a one-way flow, like coming from the human and being sent out to the dog, right? It's a flow, it's an exchange, it's a dialogue. I call that a dialogue loop. And you can also see that it's much more than information. Right? We're talking about ideas and feelings. Your dog's ideas and your dog's feelings, as well as your feelings and your feelings about your dog's feelings and your dog's ideas. You know what I'm saying? And when we take all of this into account, we are communicating or not. One thing I found over the years is that we are often inadvertently teaching our dogs to ignore us. And like, what? I mean, it's pretty simple. When we ask our dogs to do something that they cannot do for any reason, when we focus on training instead of lifestyle, when we are distracted or incongruent or unsure, when we are not feeling safe, calm, and happy, when we are not acutely aware of the effect we're having on our dog, and we're not modulating with that awareness, we are thereby teaching our dogs to take responsibility for filtering out our communication, like leaving it up to them to discern what is relevant and what is not in any given circumstance, right? And if we leave it up to them alone to figure out what's important and what's not, you know, in a way, we are setting up our partnership for failure. And so instead, we want to teach ourselves to be more fully aware, more conscious, more cognitive of what is happening in any given circumstance, right? And if you consciously communicate with your dog whenever you are interacting, your dog, you are in opposition to the first thing that happens, you're actually teaching your dog to be attentive and responsive to you. You know what I mean? Because we are attentive and responsive first to ourselves and then, you know, a close second to our dogs. And that, my friends, is the language of partnership. And that leads to the circle of understanding and cooperation. And this is where we want to be, right? This circle is sort of like a container of connection and understanding and cooperation. And as we learn to deepen our communication skills, we remember that our dogs are dogs. Our dogs are naturally keen observers. I mean, they're hunters by nature, right? And their skills of observation are like off the charts. I mean, humans can be as well when we live in a more natural environment, but there's a lot of things that have just become dulled because we don't need, you know, those skills don't need to stay relevant. Now, certainly that's the case for our dogs on some levels as well. Yet our dogs retain their animal instincts in a, you know, in other words, their keen skills of observation are still intact relative to ours, right? And yet we can step back into that. Some of the important ways that we animals, us and our dogs, communicate what our dogs see, hear, smell, we can be particularly interested in what our dogs see and hear because we do want our dogs to keep us in their sights. We can also use sounds to have a specific effect, especially while we are in the process of learning how to be partners with our dogs, right? And so, for example, high-pitched, repetitive sounds inspire action. Slow, low, soothing sounds are more calming. Okay, movement. Dogs are very, very attentive to movement. And so we could use that in our interactions, when needed, as needed, just especially just to be aware. For example, moving away from a dog quickly grabs their attention because their dogs are very focused on movement, right? And when we move away from our dog, that can not only capture their attention, but it can cause them to move toward us. We want to pay particular attention to the emotions that our dogs are expressing. And you can gather that information from the way they use their eyes and their mouth and their ears, their posture, their tongue, their tail carriage, the way they move, right? And so our dogs are communicating with that continually, as are we. I think they say that like 80%, at least 80% of communication between humans happens on a nonverbal level. So it's really interesting. And so our dog, in that way, we're very much like our dogs, right? So most of the way dogs communicate is non-audible, although they certainly use their audible voice quite regularly, right? But there's so many details, so much communication in that expression, right? What I would just put into the bucket of expression. Now, here's a really important piece, and that is intention. When we pay attention to how we are using our intention and what intention our dogs have, it's so powerful. It really brings us up to a whole new level of communication. And so intention, the way I think about intention is what's the purpose behind the expression, behind the action, behind what's happening, right? So what's the intention? Now, some things are autonomous. They're non-intentional. They're just automatic responses, like we get startled by something, et cetera. But much of our communication is very intentional, even if it's not conscious. It's subconscious expressions of how we are thinking and feeling in the moment and how we're responding to a circumstance. And so the same sorts of things are happening for both us and our dogs in this flow of communication. And so I think of it as a dialogue loop, right? You hear me talk about that, a dialogue loop. When we're aware that this is what's happening all the time, we can use that to our advancement of our partnership with our dogs. And that intention of using it in that way is where a deeper level of trust emanates from. That's where a deeper bond is established. It's through that intention of really wanting to understand ourselves, what we are communicating and why and how that's being received, and deeply understanding our dogs and what they're communicating and what's behind that. What is their intention? And just think about a lot of the misunderstanding about our dogs' behavior comes from this idea that we were not really understanding their intention, or we're misappropriating their intention, so to speak, And so you hear me talk about this concept of our reactive, distracted, unruly dogs are not giving us a hard time. They're having a hard time. And what's behind that is understanding the intention of our dog. Like, our dogs don't intend to they don't wake up one day and say, hey, today I'm going to be as uncooperative and unruly as I can possibly imagine being so that my human, has a meltdown and therefore has a really, really bad day. Like dogs don't wake up thinking that way. Neither do humans in most cases, you know what I mean? And so when we unpack that idea and we get down to what's underneath that behavior. So we're starting with the baseline of behavior is communication. And then we go underneath that and we start to unpack it a little bit more. And we get to this idea of, oh, part of the understanding about the behavior and the communication behind the behavior is what's behind the communication. What's the intention behind the communication, right? And so, when we think about our dog doesn't come in from the backyard when we call, they're not saying, hey, screw you. I don't want to listen to you right now. I just choose not to. It's not, their intention is not that they want to make us feel bad or make us feel unwanted and unloved. You know what I mean? The intention is to communicate like, I'm involved in something right now. I'm busy. I'm wrapped up in something and I can't quite get to the place where I can be responsive to you in the moment. The same way we are, like the same way I would be right in this very moment, the same way, like if one of my dogs started bopping his nose or her nose on my leg in this very moment while I'm recording this podcast, I'm not going to be responsive. My dog is saying, hello, hey, mom, right? The same way I might open the door and say, hey, Katie, right? And if she's not responding, it's because she's doing her version of something important, recording a podcast, you know what I mean? The same way you know what I mean? And so what's the intention? So if I were to not respond to my dog right now while my dog is poking my leg while I'm recording this podcast, my intention is not to say, hey, I'm ignoring you. You don't mean anything to me. You're not important to me. I don't care about you. I don't love you. I'm not responsive to you. Like that's not my intention at all. Not by a million miles, right? My intention is to be attentive and responsive and respectful and honoring my dog while I'm attentive and responsive and honoring and respectful to myself. Where do we meet? Like, where do those two things meet? And they do meet. They are not counter to one another. They come together in this beautiful place that is partnership. And when we talk about safe, calm, and happy needing to be for both of us, that's what I'm talking about, right? That is the place where we come together and we say, hey, right now, I can't attend to you. Give me a few moments, right? And the same way, we would use the idea of the 95% rule and allowing our dogs that opportunity to be consensual, so that our leadership is consensual leadership, not demanding or expecting them to be responsive to a trained cue. You know what I mean? And I talked about that. Gosh, I can't think of which episode it is, but I talked about when my dogs are out in the backyard looking, assessing what are they thinking? What are they involved in? Are they likely to be willing and eager to respond if I invite them back into the house? You know what I mean? And so it's consensual, it's reciprocal, it's collaborative, it's a partnership. That is how a partnership develops. One little moment at a time, one little decision at a time, one little communication at a time. That makes sense? And so intention is behind all of that. Whew. All right. So I went a little bit deep into communication today. So I hope that you find this to be really, really helpful and that it helps bring you more clarity about communication and the dialogue loop and partnership. So that's it for today, my friends. Thank you very much for spending this time with me. It's always a delight for me to share this with you. And I will see you next week. In the meantime, be brilliant. Thanks so much for listening. And hey, if you would like to work with me so that I can help you discover the missing pieces you need so that you and your dog can finally be happy and enjoy life together, then head on over to dancingheartsdogacademy.com and request your invitation to join us in the Brilliant Partners Academy when the doors open for the next enrollment. See you next time, and remember, a brilliant partnership with your dog makes your whole life brilliant.